Welcome back to another episode of the Aquademia podcast. I'm your host, Justin Grant.
And I'm Maddie Cassidy.
And today we are sitting down with Melanie Siggs, who is the Director of Strategic Engagement for GSA, and Travis Henneveld, who's the Director of Connectivity Solutions at Geeks Without Frontiers. They both were working very closely on a vessel Wi-Fi connectivity project. There is a wealth of information that we discussed throughout this episode, but before we get into that, I want to remind everyone that Aquademia is on Twitter at Aquademia Pod. Go ahead and find us and follow us. If you want to contact the podcast for any reason, you can do so with our online form located at globalseafood.org/podcast.
And if you enjoy the Aquademia podcast, then leave us a rating or review on whichever podcast platform you listen to us on. And while you're at it, be sure to subscribe so that you get every episode directly downloaded to your device right when it comes out.
Now stay tuned for our conversation with Melanie and Travis, and we will talk to you at the end.
Welcome to the Aquademia podcast.
Our diet is hurting the environment in myriad ways. I mean, we desperately need to eat more seafood.
This is a pioneering industry with a whole lot of people who have really good ideas and a lot of experience and are unafraid.
Aquademia is your go-to podcast for a fresh take on all things seafood.
Melanie and Travis, thank you so much for joining us on the Aquademia podcast today. How are you both doing?
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Feeling good. Nice to be summer.
Yes. We've had like a heat wave here where it's been in like the high 80s. Tomorrow's going to be even hotter. Maddie, a few of us from the outreach team are going to be doing some community service work outside with hammers and large equipment. So it's
94 degrees. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, honestly though, from a Brit who loves to talk about the weather, could you not tell me this? Because we have not yet had summer. So if you could just send us a little of that heat, we would be very grateful. I'm sat here in a fleece.
We would be happy to.
It's very depressing. But we have long daylight hours. That's good enough.
All right. Well, hopefully the heat is like moving out that
There
way.
you go.
It's just got to cross the sea and get over there.
What could go wrong?
So what I'd like to do is we have a pretty big agenda ahead of us because we're going to be focusing a lot on this collaborative project that Melanie and Travis, you worked on together, which is a vessel Wi-Fi project. There's a lot to cover there, but before we jump into our questions with both of you, could we start with you, Melanie, and just get a quick background of who you are and what you do?
Sure. So Melanie Siggs. I've been working with GSA, who were GAA, Global Aquaculture Alliance, back in the day for probably about 15 years, probably longer than I care to remember. And we've worked on a lot of what you might call special projects together, always looking at what's coming down the line, what needs addressing next, what's going to keep, the business of seafood production in a good place, because that's where we need to be. And when we moved into being Global Seafood Alliance and taking on some of the wild capture issues, that was when I started taking on some of the projects that related to people and social issues and human rights. And that's how I come to be a part of this.
Perfect. Thanks. And Travis?
Yeah, yep. My name is Travis. I have a background in basically all things telecom. Started out in working on the sort of planning side when companies called Ericsson and Orange and Nokia were not known for making phones because nobody was using a phone, and went through that whole process of going from up to 100% or more penetration across the world, basically, and then spent a long time at Motorola Solutions, and mostly in Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, working on wireless connectivity projects of all kinds, specifically with governments and with enterprises, more than the consumer side, which I'd done earlier as a managing consultant. So based in California and Germany, that's how I balance my time currently.
Great.
So speaking of connectivity, we are focusing our conversation today on being connected on fishing vessels, which seems like a daunting task, but there are solutions. I think there's been a lot of research that both of you have been collaborating on. But I want to kick this off with what actually motivated GSA, or Global Seafood Alliance, to undertake this research on Wi-Fi provision for fishing crews, and what are the key objectives you aim to achieve with this report?
Cool. It's a great question to kick off with. Why on earth did we do this? This was a very new area for us. But as we moved into the area of wild harvest seafood, we then started to look at crews on board fishing vessels. And, that was an area that was beginning to get a lot of focus and attention, for not always for good reasons. And so 2018 through 2020, thereabouts, might have started a little bit earlier. We developed, because that's what we do best, is creating standards. And just a little aside, standards are like really clunky. People can think that they're not the answer to everything. They're not the answer to everything. But my little analogy on the business of standards, they're like if you got the big jigsaw and you tip it out on the table, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to look for the corner pieces. And for me, those are standards and regulations, and those clunky pieces that give us that kind of solid base from which to work. And then there's 1,000 very special pieces that make up that whole picture that we're trying to create. The whole picture in this case being good crew welfare for those guys that are working at sea on these vessels. So when we started to develop the responsible fishing vessel standard, that corner piece that's going to give us a kind of bedrock of a benchmark, if you like, of what good crew welfare looks like. We did that in the same way as we go about creating all our standards. It's very collaborative, it's very transparent, it's based on like global conventions, all those sort of things. And we do that by then looking at how do we interpret that into the indicators? What is it that we're going to measure in those standards, and the metrics? But these were very new areas, not just for us, but for everybody, looking at crew welfare. So we needed to interpret them in different ways, and kind of understanding what is possible. If you've got no guidance and no consensus, no support, no experience, that can be very difficult sometimes. And so we needed to look at some of the aspects of good crew welfare, and specifically here I'm referring to grievance mechanisms and worker voice, in a really deep dive to look at these in a different way. And our first body of research explored sort of expectations around those. So if you, as a buyer perhaps, or perhaps you're a regulator looking at the using a standard to inform your policy and regulations, what do you think it's going to mean if people have access to grievance mechanisms and worker voice on a fishing vessel? What does that actually mean? And that was our first body of work. And what came out of that, I won't go into the detail of that piece of work, but one of the things that came out was this realization that you needed connectivity. Otherwise, it wouldn't matter how good those mechanisms were. If you're offshore and you can't connect, it's kind of null and void. So there was a realization that Wi-Fi and connectivity at sea is critical, or they would be inaccessible. So there were a number of recommendations in that first piece of work, but we took forward the exploring of Wi-Fi for crew at sea. And what we do at GSA is we work on understanding best practice. So our research explores what is possible. What is the differences in experiences at sea, and what might crew use Wi-Fi for at the current time. So that's how we came to be doing this work.
That's great. So as Melanie mentioned, there are 2 reports on this subject, one kind of building off of the first. And in this second report, which came out earlier this year, it highlights several challenges in providing Wi-Fi at sea, like cost, quality, data management. And I think it would be interesting for our listeners if you could provide some more details on why those are obstacles, particularly on fishing vessels.
Sure. And I think, clearly we haven't got that technical expertise in-house. You've got to go out and find it. And I think it's also important to recognize that you've got the aspects of why do you need to be providing connectivity at sea, and what are all of those advantages, disadvantages, challenges, etc., but also those technical pieces. And it was very clear that the technical and kind of added value aspects of Wi-Fi for crew, they're moving really fast. And there was, as we found, already work being done in these areas on fishing vessels. So we partnered in that project with a couple of more technical partners. One is Integrated Monitoring in Boston, but the other is Geeks Without Frontiers, who had done work on this really in practice as well. So I'm really delighted that we've got Travis Henneveld with us from Geeks here, so that I can hand this over to him. Travis.
So first, maybe I'll just introduce Geeks Without Frontiers. It's a global nonprofit, award-winning, that focuses on the power or enablement potential of connectivity to tackle the Sustainable Development Goals, health, education, economic development, and worker grievance with marginalized populations. So that's sort of what we do. We're a collective, and we work on projects all over the world. You can see us, I'll name drop geekswf.org and n50project.org, which is an alliance of over 200 partners working towards similar goals. So that's sort of our bread and butter, I would say. And when these projects came up, it was more like taking what we know and do every day to sometimes what some people call the last frontier when it comes to the world being connected, right, which is at sea. So some things are very similar. The cost affordability challenge is something everywhere, and you see prices and barriers to entry for on the affordability side coming down over time, and so that is one challenge. It's just the sheer cost of it. But I think in the at sea vessel context, there's other things at play, right? So it's about it could be security and data safety, or even safety of using connectivity, because you should be on something else. It's about sharing not only the data, but also how do you get connectivity to work through the different walls and parts of the vessel, etc. And then I think the other thing is, usually when you look sort of before and after from a connectivity perspective, one thing you do get is operational efficiency. So I think it's also about, on the worker grievance issue, or in that context, how do you find the right blend between a connectivity solution that is not only improving operational efficiency for everyone and everything going on the vessel, but also getting into that, what Melanie was saying about well-being and worker grievance. So happy to keep going on that if there's specifics.
Oh, absolutely, keep going.
Okay, so in terms of solutions, right, and how to tackle some of the challenges. We've done a number of projects in the maritime space with connectivity and worker grievance, including one in Thailand, funded by the Walmart Foundation, and went through the whole process of interviewing all the stakeholders, et cetera. And certainly, one way to tackle this and approach it is to aggregate demand. So basically what that means is, instead of each vessel or even each worker, seeing what they can get and how much it costs to have that connectivity, it's about using and leveraging, associations of vessel owners in a given country or in a given region. But it could also be, coming through other avenues like resellers, retailers, basically making a combined ask to the service providers, and maintaining your independence and control and procurement, but at the same time having being seen as an aggregated group that needs connectivity. That's one way to deal with this. I mean, a second solution is to sort of have that fit for purpose connectivity solution. I mean, we talk about Wi-Fi a lot as sort of the buzzword for being connected, but and that is true. I mean, your phone or your whatever you're using, is going to probably connect through Wi-Fi. But if you go to the next level, you're going to be, making decisions based on, am I using that cellular network because I'm near enough to shore and I still have that connection, or am I using a satellite connection? And then, what does that mean based on the size of the vessel, based on the different types of users on the vessel, and maybe I might have something that is a sort of, we call it a connected box that you might have on the vessel that deals and even works with these different options that I mentioned.
Well, and I think just listening to Travis's comments, right? It's not for any of us that probably don't consider ourselves Wi-Fi experts or connectivity experts. There's just so much to unpack here, right? From your proximity to land, policies and procedures that still need to be kind of worked through. But I think
and it's moving fast, like the Starlink proposition, for example. I don't know if you can speak to that at all, Travis.
No, I would like to. Yeah, I mean, one thing I want to say first, though, is part of the good news is that you're going to find those experts locally, no matter where you are. Okay, so you've got people that have 10 plus years experience working on connectivity, working on applications, and even working in the context of, we talked earlier about standards and local rules and regulations. And so that's something to really leverage. And, those cell phone companies, the national, main operator or the second one, I mean, these people know what they're doing, and there's trusted and tested solutions that they've done. So I think there is also something about making the maritime sector at a national/regional level be seen more as a sort of group that uses and needs solutions, and leveraging those local people. Which brings us to Starlink as a segue, because what Starlink needs is a national approval to operate and provide service in a given country, right? So if you go to the Starlink webpage, you can see what they call their coverage map, and you can see all those countries, which includes, for instance, Fiji, which is the site where we did another project, and really worked with the workers on the vessels there. But you can see where Starlink is already operating, and you've got Starlink now has a full maritime offering as well, right? And you in the last 6 to 9 months, talking about affordability, you're seeing price points that are going much lower than the initial $110 or so a month that you'll see in countries like the U.S. So there's room to work with there, and on the horizon is a competitor to Starlink called Kuiper, which is coming from the Jeff Bezos world of investment, and which will be coming out soon in less than a year, and so that's going to put downward pressure on pricing as well, and
absolutely,
and give choice to everyone, including vessel operators.
So bringing it back to how this all connects to grievance mechanisms, how does access to connectivity influence the welfare and retention of fishing crew members? And also, going back to what the research said, Melanie, what did the research uncover about these benefits of providing connectivity?
Yeah, thanks, Maddie. Because I think what we're showing really is there's two very significant pillars here. One is this whole technical piece, and the other is the piece that's around people. So if we go back to the people pillar, if you like, I think nowadays there's very few of us that could imagine a life without connectivity. I used to travel in Africa a lot when I was working in forestry more, and it was amazing to see that emerge over Africa, because connectivity became more and more apparent, even when you were in the middle of nowhere, because it was actually easier. So wherever you are now, it's difficult to imagine a life without connectivity, except arguably at sea. And if you couple that with being away from home, and often in this very alien and restricted environment, being unable to communicate outside of immediate crew and officers, often for long periods of a time, I just think, that must be very negatively, it must impact very negatively on your well-being, to be quite honest with you. And this is firstly a question of well-being. That's what's driven this. To open this very broad conversation, people need to be able to stay in touch with family and friends and with their community. There are many vessels that enable that now, but still plenty where a call home is a privilege or an emergency, and often has to be express permission of the skipper, or his officers. So connectivity and expectation of that kind of differs from country to country. For example, vessel owners I visited in Cape Town in South Africa provided it very much as standard, and we're almost sort of like, why are we even having this conversation? Because we just do this,
Yeah.
They say that crew expect it, but what we do know is that there's a very strong national recruitment in the crews. There's very strong trade unions, a strong understanding of rights on these vessels that are based out of Cape Town, these South African vessels. However, between vessel owners, very different services and contracts, which may be improved if, we were to pursue kind of Travis's thoughts on how to, aggregate some of these things and to improve costs and connectivity and services, and they might have less hassle and less cost. So that's one aspect. But we also learned of situations where there is Wi-Fi on board and connectivity on board. This is in other countries, but only available to the officers or to the crew in the case of an emergency, so they could request it. And interestingly, when I spoke to vessel owners in these cases, it wasn't that they didn't want to give them access. It hadn't occurred to them that to provide Wi-Fi to the crew at sea, and that just hadn't really occurred to them, like why they would do that. They can get it if they need it, just come and ask us. And it also reflected some nervousness in doing that we heard in lots of places. So I think this business of well-being and the importance of maintaining contact with home, which we might consider a human right in this case, is the primary issue. And in our research, crew told us that was the most important thing to them and what they wanted to use Wi-Fi for. But it's important that there are to be meaningful worker voice and grievance mechanisms. Then we need that connectivity. And if we're clear about what that means, these mechanisms are predominantly meant to, give crew a voice and a valid view on the way in which things are working, but also to enable them to highlight any breaches of contract. That's really what grievance mechanisms are about. So not only is quality connectivity essential to enable both of those, but they can be like service to potentially reduce the need to use them. And what I mean by that is that if we, for example, ensure that crew have, let's say, digital pay slips, digital contracts, so they've got Wi-Fi connectivity, so we can send them digital pay slips. We can make sure that they have digital contracts that they can look at when they're at sea. We could have ongoing welfare check-ins, make sure that everything's okay. And we can make sure that training's sort of proactively sent. Then the role of Wi-Fi is highlighted as a tool to improve that relationship between crew and employer, but as well as sort of enabling that connection with home and with support services. So in short, it's about well-being and contact with home, which is critical, but it's about safe, confidential access to third-party support. It's about providing more support digitally, which can improve communications and confidence and retention and relationships. And I think really we just have to recognize that digital connectivity is a part of life now, whether that's on land or at sea.
So there's a few things that you mentioned, Melanie, that I wanted to dive into a little bit deeper, but I think we're going to get there in kind of our next question. And so I'm going to hold off on those questions until we kind of get through this. But talking about best practices and standards, right? I think we touched on it a little bit in the beginning, but to revisit that, so what does the report call for like establishing minimum best practices standards for Wi-Fi access? Do you have any specific recommendations? And how do you envision these standards being implemented across the industry?
Sort of, yes. So I sat here, could tell you what I think, but that would be inappropriate because that's not how we create consensus.
Right.
So when we started investigating Wi-Fi at sea, I think we and others all thought that the ask was going to be like 24-hour full Wi-Fi provided at sea, free of cost. And I think that's still, kind of a bit of an expectation. But we need to test that, and particularly test that given some of the feedback that we've had. So it might still be an expectation, but what's become apparent is that actually a minimum level of connectivity has yet to be agreed, and that's really important. And we have to agree that by consensus. So, for example, it might be that being able to message and to call family and friends, to contact a grievance mechanism or a worker voice facility free of cost, that may be the minimum requirement. And what you'll notice is that may not include data. So it may be agreed that it's inappropriate to provide Wi-Fi when the vessel is actively fishing for safety reasons, which is something that Travis alluded to a little earlier. Perhaps they can purchase data, whereas that minimum would be free of cost. So technically, these things are possible to kind of manage the way in which the Wi-Fi is provided. It might be that actually there's a sliding scale. So if it's a 48-hour trip, then there's a very minimum expectation about calls and messaging. Maybe if it's a longer trip of months, then in fact a little bit more is included in that. Maybe if it's years, even more is provided in that. But I think that safety aspect is going to be really important. And that's why we need to kind of collectively agree on the minimum expectations. Now, of course, employers can always give more if they want to, but understanding what is minimum expectation that says, we've addressed the business of crew welfare and human rights and well-being and all those things, and safety and dignity. It's important for us to agree on that, not for me or us as GSA to decide that, but if GSA facilitate the dialogues to reach that agreement, then the outcomes would certainly be publicly available. And the intention would be that those could then be taken up by, vessel owners that are operating at best practice, by standard holders like ourselves and fish crew, for example, and others, by regulators. They could be used as guidance by trade bodies, by NGOs and others.
Travis, do you have anything to add to Melanie's points?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think what's good about what GSA or any organization that's trying to look at the bigger picture is, you want to get momentum in, I would say, smaller or tighter clusters of stakeholders, and that could be regional, could be retailers. I mean, and that you start learning how it goes. I mean, I always think back. I use the metaphor or example of hotel, connectivity. Remember back when you had to pay $10 per day to get connected or whatever, and now it's almost like it's automatic, right? So we'll get there, but there's gonna be a few steps, and I think it's really important to have an organization like GSA that is, getting those initial sort of clusters that then start snowballing into bigger things. And the milestones, the organizations, the annual meetings, they're all out there to work that standard regulatory advocacy discussion.
So, Travis, you mentioned stakeholders and how they have to play a huge role in this whole undertaking. And I wonder, from what both of you have experienced throughout this project, what has the response been from the stakeholders you've interacted with thus far?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, so basically, I mean, if you combine, okay, if you can find the driver for the stakeholder and how it fit, like it's a relevant driver, then it's going to work. So, example, Fiji, the vessel owners, when we met them, were looking at how can I use better connectivity, including video, Wi-Fi, and other things for my operational efficiency, right? So when talking about worker grievance and connected workers in that same sort of time frame was very interesting for them, because they're like, oh yeah, well, okay, we can also include that, and we can also, it can lead to satisfaction, worker satisfaction, stuff like that. So it's really important to have that combined drive, right, or momentum, right? Look at what the investments are being made from an IT perspective, and how can that fit. That's on one side of the spectrum of stakeholders. On the other side of the stakeholder spectrum is the nonprofits or the worker collectives, and the organizations, very local, that are acting as that go-between, and also being a I would say, well, and as independent as possible gatekeeper, or somebody trying to make things work, and take into account, like Melanie was saying, the local context. And so in Fiji and in Thailand, we saw that as very key. So instead of sort of sitting back from our seat in New England or Old England and saying, let's partner with this one NGO and do this worldwide. It's about finding those local stakeholders and learning from that, doing that once, twice, thrice, and then seeing what sort of best practices and what worked and what didn't.
Melanie, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that was great, actually. I think it just underpins why it's so important that we build this consensus around that kind of minimum, and then we take that into these different spaces, and we help find the support that vessel owners are going to need in order to deliver that best practice at different places. And you've mentioned cultural a couple of times here. That's going to be important to help both the vessel owners and the crew. And a lot of skippers, their business is about catching fish. Why should they know how to manage Wi-Fi and all those kind of things? So we need to be sensitive to all that stuff as well.
Yeah, it's, as we've unpacked our discussions here, there's so much detail and things that still need to be thought of in order for this to come together, right? And
I think, to your point, we just need to be very thoughtful. So I think as you listen to us talking, we can make this really complicated real fast, on both sides, whether that's about why folks should get this connectivity, what that looks like, what they use it for, all those sort of things, or whether it's about the technical piece. We can make it super complicated, and then we can take that around the world and make it even more complicated. We have a little saying, you probably have it in the US as well, the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid. Yeah. And I think we have to kind of take a step back sometimes and apply that here as well. So there are the two basic components here is, number one, we have to get consensus, and that's really important, the consensus piece, on what are the minimum requirements. Minimum doesn't mean like cheap. It doesn't mean that it's not enough. Minimum just means what's the absolute minimum that everyone should receive. as best practice, and to ensure that they have the well-being and so forth that is needed, and the access to the support services, all those things. And then the second piece is, how do we support folks to put that into place so that they meet that best practice? And if we look at the way that all of this technology on land has developed over the years, it's very feasible that within a very short space of time, in real terms, this will just be the norm. It will be the norm that crew will have this access, that we will know what that expectation looks like, and that vessel owners will be able to kind of sign up to something quite easily. But we're at the stage of putting all that together.
It seems like we're kind of at an inflection point right now where the technology is starting to catch up to the demand, particularly at sea. And so, Travis, I wonder if you could speak to, you said that there's already been a lot of developments in the past 6 to 9 months. Where do you see things standing from a technology standpoint a year from now or into the future beyond that?
Okay, so the first thing is, technically, everything works. So right today. So no, it's important because it's going to work. So you don't have to worry about that. And then, like I said earlier, you've got local folks who actually know what they're doing, right? So you've got readily available help. So that's where we are now, right? What you're looking at, I would say, down the road is just in addition to the competitive or multiple price points for this lower orbit satellite, which is what Starlink is you're just going to see even better management of the user experience, capacity, keeping it simple in terms of buffering things. I mean, we just did recently a workshop test for WhatsApp over 2G. And actually, you do see the video now. I mean, it comes in and out in terms of patchiness, but you see the video. So it's continuously improving that user experience, and that's because a year from now that will be a year and a half, 2 years that integrators in the maritime space, traditional providers of connectivity services in the maritime space have and are working with Starlink and other solutions that are out there.
And from your perspective, Melanie, looking to the future, what are the next steps for GSA with this project? And also, how do you/we/the world plan on addressing emerging issues that come up in the future?
Yeah. So just a small question there, Maddie.
Yes, just ending on a little light note for us.
So look, our work to date has been firstly to create that globally applicable standard, through consensus building and global conventions. For us, it's been very much about creating the responsible fishing vessel standard and then taking this deep dive into these kind of niche areas where there's a lack of clarity and understanding and support. And for us, that was around worker voice, grievance mechanism, and now the Wi-Fi connectivity. So I think it's important for us to remember these kind of different roles that we all play. So for some, it's this role of disruptor to highlight issues. And for others like us, it's to demonstrate what current best practice looks like, and accordingly, what we can expect to be happening now, to be bringing people together to build consensus, to share and implement those outcomes, and to revisit those as necessary as we go forward. We look at, if you like, the art of the possible and how to enable and support that. So I think we've got quite a big job here with the Wi-Fi, and then I think that we'll be able to build better on the grievance mechanism and worker voice. And to think more about how to enable and put all of those things together. But what we're doing in real terms right now is really just seeking this kind of funding and partners to hold these global conversations to get this consensus. Ideally, we want to do as many as we can in person, which is always a bit of a luxury nowadays, but you get such additional value out of being able to talk to people in person. And those conversations, I think, are going to really address 4 things, and we can refine these a bit going forward. But number 1, what is the minimum that all vessel owners should provide to crew at sea? Number 2, what additional services and operations can benefit from this quality connectivity at sea? So how can we demonstrate that? What are the options for providing that quality Wi-Fi at sea, and what support is available to help vessel owners do that? And then how do we ensure that both crew and officers are aware of the Wi-Fi provision, the kind of boundaries and how they manage those? We've got, I think, a lot of folks wanting us to do that and encouraging us to get on and do this, but funding's always critical, and that's where we're really working now. We've got some interest from private sector and from some NGO partners to work together, and some interest from funders. But this is always the tough bit, is sort of putting all of this together and making it happen. But I think what we are dedicated to is, really recognizing that actually working, blue food, seafood, as a food system is a fantastic planetary food system, and it's providing a lot of people with jobs and livelihoods that they may not have elsewhere. And so we have a kind of collective responsibility to make sure that that's decent and dignified and safe work. And that's the lens through which we need to put all of this when it gets a bit too difficult. So that's where we are, trying to work out how to build that consensus, get the funding to hold those conversations, share the outcomes of all of that, and help enable this to take place over the next couple of years. So it's in place over the next couple of years.
In an effort to stay very close to our time,
yes,
Travis, if there's anything else you'd like to add, let us know.
I think there's really 2 tracks here, right? I mean, there's the consensus building and learning that Melanie's talking about, and then there's just rolling up the sleeves and getting some projects rolled out at the country level. Like I said, the technology works, and things are being installed on vessels. So it's also about just getting a few of those up and running, and learning from that, and building confidence as we go forward.
I did have something I just wanted to add as well, but if you finish with Travis, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I'm just very mindful that we're rightly focused on crew at sea and all of this. But before we close out completely, I do just want to mention seafood workers on land, because we're very focused on connectivity at sea. But I think we need to also make sure that this connectivity is a requirement for seafood workers on land who are living away from home. We often use this term migrant, but that doesn't usually cover kind of in-country workers, where you've got big countries like India or Indonesia, for example. But ensuring those workers are also able to stay connected to home and to communities and have safe access to worker voice and grievance mechanisms, and that they have digital contracts and digital pay slips and all those kind of things. So, I'm thinking about workers in aquaculture farms or seafood processing plants. We need to keep an eye on that too. And so I think this is about all people who are working in the production of well-produced, responsible seafood. That's who we're thinking about, making sure that we create decent work that's safe and dignified, and that we would want to work in.
If any of our listeners want to learn more or contact either one of you, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Sure. So as the dialogues emerge, and hopefully they will, we'll obviously keep people posted through our normal channels of social media and emails and so on. But folks are very welcome to email me, so melanie.siggs@globalseafood.org. And also you can find the Wi-Fi report that we've been talking about on the GSA website. And if you drop any of us a line, we can give you a link to that if you can't find it.
And I will make sure to make it really easy. Our listeners, especially the ones who are subscribers, know that in our show notes, we will link to everything that we mentioned. There's multiple reports that we talked about, your email addresses. I want to also add website information. so people can go check out our show notes and find all those useful links right there.
Terrific.
Well, Travis, Melanie, thank you both for spending the time with Maddie and I to discuss all the ins and outs of where we're going with vessel Wi-Fi. And again, we both really appreciate all the work that you've both been doing and are continuing to do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Justin. Thanks, Maddie.
Folks, that was our episode with Melanie and Travis. I hope you learned something. If you want to get involved, check out our show notes. There are a ton of useful links where you can learn a little bit more about the topics we discussed. Make sure to follow us on Twitter if you're not already, at Aquademia Pod. If you want to contact podcast for any reason, you can do so with our online form located at globalseafood.org/podcast.
And if this episode especially spoke to you, then the way to let us know is by rating or reviewing this episode or the entire podcast on whichever podcast platform you listen to us on. And the best way to show your support for the show is by subscribing so that you get every episode downloaded to your device.
Thanks again for tuning in and being a listener of the Aquademia podcast, and we will see you at the next episode.
Bye.
Ciao.